Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have a very different video than I normally do. This time I'm talking about adaptations. This video today is going to be my pitch for how I would adapt the Cosmere. It's a very rough sketch of how I think they should go about it. Obviously, this is my opinion. This is not, for one, this is not what they're going to do, because I do not believe Hollywood would ever go down this road. And for two, this may not even be the right road for them to go down. So I can't, speak to that. I'm just saying this is how I would do it if I had the opportunity. So if you have different opinions, let me know how you would do it. I think it's great to foster discussion about this. And as many people know, Brandon Sanderson is already in discussions with some studios about adapting his Cosmere. We don't know what those discussions are. We don't know with whom they are, or when everything will come to fruition. He said he thinks by summer of next year or fall of next year they might be shooting, but we don't know. And so I thought that I would provide my pitch and explain the methodology behind how I think they should do the Cosmere. So there's a couple of things I want to point out. For one thing, I think that that they need to find the right studio to manage this. I think that there are, in my mind, two studios that could do this right, but there's one that I think should do it. So you have to think which studios have the money to be able to put money behind this, have the infrastructure of a fan base, and also have the expectations of that quality storytelling. Obviously, Brandon Sanderson's stories aren't a hard R, so they don't need to be on HBO, but they are so usually most of them aren't particularly kid friendly, so it might not work on Disney Plus. And also something like Disney Plus is also Disney's more focused on their own IP, so unless they could buy out Brandon Sanderson's IP, which he would never do, they're not interested in working with him. So I don't think that Disney's involved at all. So I would throw them out as a potential. Peacock is just not large enough to potentially house or afford this. Now, something like Paramount Plus is on the verge of being able to. They're experimenting with larger budget shows, but they have not yet cracked the code, and I don't think they should start with the Cosmere. So that leaves a couple of options. One option that leaves is Netflix, who has not only experience with big budget shows like The Crown and Dahmer, but they have experience with fantasy adaptations. Shadow and Bone being one of many that they've done recently. So they could potentially do it. Oh, and Witcher, obviously. Then, on the other hand, you have Warner Brothers and specifically HBO, which has, of course, House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones, and many other shows, big budget, small budget, that they've developed. There is an option for Amazon, and we do know that Brandon has a relationship with some of the people over at Amazon because of his loose consulting work he's had on The Wheel of Time. However, I don't believe that Amazon is the right fit. They already have enough to do fantasy related, and also I don't think that they understand how to write and produce, not write, but how to produce the right kind of fantasy entertainment. I think that if it's me, Warner Brothers is the best option because HBO is the most solid fantasy adaptation machine, especially for television. Also for movies, because Lord of the Rings, obviously, and Harry Potter. But let's look at television. Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon are the top tier how to deal with this. And so I would say Warner Brothers is the place I think that they should go. Another thing that I think is necessary is I think you need a singular showrunner or showrunners who are over all of the Cosmere. You can have a showrunner in charge of a specific show here, or maybe a showrunner in charge of a specific show here that are not the same person, but you need that kind of person who's in charge of all of it, who can advise and be a part of and command and be able to provide a cohesiveness. Everyone's going to compare it to Kevin Feige, And yes, I think this is a little bit like a Kevin Feige, but I also think an apt comparison would be perhaps a Jon Favreau or Dave Filoni, who they have multiple series they're working on in Star Wars, but they're so interconnected together that they basically created multiple parts of the universe that they work in that are all coming together. And I think that they're able to do connections and they're able to do references in a way that if you were running everything separately, it would not work out properly. And so I think you need that singular showrunner. Who that showrunner is, I don't know, and I can't speak to that. But I think that you need that type of person involved. The last caveat I'll provide is that Brandon's talked about the idea of doing Mistborn as a movie and doing some of his other books as movies as opposed to television. And I see where he's going with that, and movies have a different feeling to them than television, that's true. But I believe that his novels, particularly his Cosmere novels, are most suited to fairly big budget television adaptations. I think that they match that quality the best. And so I'm going to outline how I would do television in 3 phases. I think that each phase gets bigger and each phase changes a little bit. So I'm going to outline how I would do the 3 phases. I don't particularly have directors or writers in mind of who should do or who should be involved in each phase, but I do have general ideas for what to do. So the first phase that I would do is what show do you use to start the Cosmere? This is a very important question. There are 2 answers that everyone would go to. One answer would be Mistborn. Another answer would be the Stormlight Archive, start with The Way of Kings. Those are obvious answers for 2 reasons. Those are tentpole series, those are huge and action-packed and explosive, and they're also very high selling. They've both sold a lot of copies, or best-selling books. However, I would not start with either place. I do not believe either place is the right place to start. I believe you should start with Elantris. And it's not just because Elantris is my favorite Cosmere novel, or not just because it's my favorite novel of all time. I think that Elantris is a better starting place than the Mistborn series or the Stormlight Archive. When they're starting, we don't really know how Brandon's audience is going to translate to television. He has an impressive following. He has an impressive YouTube channel, an impressive, sales for his toys that he sells and his books and his everything else. So he is impressive and he is in the top of the genre. The problem is we don't know how that will entirely translate. And I think that Elantris is the perfect opportunity to explore this, to see, basically, the studio can dip their foot in the water and find out, hey, what's this really like? And then if it's as big as they think, they can go big and bold in the future. And if it's a moderate audience, they know how to temper the future seasons so they don't just kill their budget on the first season and then all of a sudden have to cancel because they've already lost money. So I think Elantris is a show that it requires some big visuals, but you don't have to break the bank on them overall because a lot of the scenes are in dark alleys, a lot of the scenes in Elantris are in rooms where people are talking. It's kind of like season 1 of Game of Thrones did not require big budgets because a lot of it was, set in the same scenes. Also, what I think would really help with Elantris is that it doesn't have a lot of action until the end, and it proves that you don't need to hook the audience with action. If you can hook them with Elantris, which has more of it has a fast pace, but it's more of a political and discussion-based series, I think that would really help establish the tone and would be able to say when you do get action, it would mean more. Whereas if you start with Mistborn, bang, you're starting with action, and it's action throughout. So it would set a different tone for what a Cosmere series has to have. Secondly, really it's actually part of the first point, which is the budget. You don't have to go crazy high. So some of these studios are spending $10, $15, $20 million in the case of House of the Dragon, $40 million with Rings of Power, which is crazy, not worth it. I mean, you can make a good TV show, but don't kill yourself making it. I think that you could do Elantris for a more moderate budget in that 10 million or maybe a little bit lower range. I think it's certainly doable with the way that the novel is written. And so they wouldn't be breaking the bank with the first season, and I'd make the first season 8 episodes long. I believe that there are 8 good breaking points in Elantris, and I believe that you could make the episodes about 40 minutes each, and it would be just enough excitement to get the audience in, but the ending would leave them wanting more for the next episode. So I think that 8 40-minute episodes are good for a season of Elantris. And they were doing a mid-budget, $8 million, $9 million an episode. Which, it's weird to say that that's mid-budget now, but, 5-10 years ago, that was huge budgets. And now, it's par for the course with TV shows. So, I'd do that. Then, wait and see how it goes, kind of like House of the Dragon did its first season and waited to see. Wait and see how the first season of Elantris is. If it's big, which I believe it would be big, if it's as big as we are thinking, then, one, you've established you can tell any type of story in the Cosmere, action-based or non-action-based, and you will have an audience. But for 2, you will be able to see, okay, well, we have a large enough audience, we can afford to go further. So that the first phase is just Elantris. The second phase is 3 seasons of Mistborn. Each season of Mistborn I would do based off of each book in the first Mistborn trilogy. 1 season for Final Empire, 1 season for Well of Ascension, and 1 season for Hero of Ages. And again, these are roughly similar length books to Elantris, maybe a little bit longer. So I would make these TV show episodes about 40 minutes. Maybe you'd jump them up to 50 or 55 minutes if necessary. But 40-ish minutes, I think, would be necessary for these seasons. And the difference here is 2 things. You are upping the production budget, and you're also upping the notoriety of the action and the notoriety of the cast. And I think that it would get a bump anyway, naturally, because Mistborn's a better known series, but it would also get the bump because of the action. And so when you combine those, the studios would say, hey, we spent a little more and we got a little more. So they could justify then going to the crazy high spending for Stormlight, which will be in Phase 3. But in Phase 2, you have 3 seasons, and this will also show that they can do multiple seasons, that they can plan things out, that they can pay things off, that they're able to think ahead, and having this showrunner who's in charge of all this will allow them to say, all right, we know that we have Hoyd, and Hoyd needs to make a bunch of appearances, so we're going to bring in an actor who's large enough that they will bring in eyeballs and they'll be recognizable and bring in people who are excited. But they're going to be small enough that we can afford to pay them cameos throughout these seasons, and then when we get to having a bigger role in the Stormlight Archive, and as a main role in Dragonsteel, we can still afford them. And so you have to get the right type of actor, maybe a Marvel actor or a Star Wars actor, someone who can be around for the next 10, 20 years, but also someone who has notoriety, but also not someone like, Robert Downey Jr., who's going to break the bank. You have to be feasible with that. But you have to get the right types of actors for the right roles. Obviously, Vin and Elend, I think, could be new roles or new people who've never, had the roles before. But maybe someone like Kelsier can be a more established actor. Or maybe the role, going back to Elantris, make Raoden and Sereni the new actors, but give Hrathen, the villain, give him a more prominent actor or a well-known actor. So Phase 2, you're upping the budgets a little bit, and also you're proving you can do multiple seasons, and you're also proving that the audience will grow. Then comes Phase 3. And Phase 3 is the most complicated phase, but I think it's the most valuable because this shows that Brandon Sanderson is not just an author, and he's not just writing novels that can be turned into television. He is a true visionary. He can create IP that compares with Star Wars, Marvel, and DC. And that's because you could have multiple different TV shows happening at once. You would have, I would envision basically three different shows. One continuous show that is smaller budget, and that would be Mistborn Era 2. We have the final Mistborn Era 2 novel coming out soon, and I don't know for a fact how big it's going to be. But if it's like the other Mistborn Era 2 novels, it's a much smaller scale story than Mistborn Era 1, and I think you could do it for a significantly smaller budget and with fewer episodes. Maybe do 4 episodes a season, or 5 episodes, or maybe even 6 instead of the full 8. And so you can do a smaller budget show that's more mystery based. It's like a Sherlock show, smaller budget, smaller scope. Then you have the medium show, which is all his Brandon Sanderson's standalone stories or smaller scale stories, like a Warbreaker season or 2, or you could do Dragonsteel or Dark One, or some of his other. I don't know if Dark One's actually Cosmere, but some of his other stories that he's written, White Sand, and you do those. And Warbreaker is a show that I would do first because it's already been established as a novel and it's really well beloved. I would do Warbreaker as a 6-episode season instead of 8. It's about the same length as Elantris and the Mistborn series, but I would make it 6 episodes instead of 8 because I think the audience will stay with you better. If you the breaking points for 8 don't work as well as the breaking points for 6 in the act structure of Mistborn. And I think that you could supersize the episodes. Don't just make them 40 minutes. Make these ones an hour and 15, an hour and 30 minutes. Make these the big plus-size episodes that really feel huge, and get an auteur director who will combine the Cosmere feeling, but also will really take it in new directions, because this Warbreaker is different from anything because the colors involved and the visual differences. So Warbreaker could be pretty much spending what you were spending on Elantris or on the Mistborn series. Your pretty big budget show. But then you move up to the final series that would be running concurrently, which is Stormlight Archive, which is the big kahuna. If you play your cards right, you've built your audience with Mistborn, and now you would build your audience with Stormlight Archive. And by building the audience with Stormlight Archive, now you can afford to spend the huge budget that you spent on Game of Thrones House of the Dragon, your $15-20 million budgets episodes. And with that, you would grow the audience even more, I think. The action would be unparalleled, the visuals would be unparalleled, and the audience now expects this spectacle, and where else to get spectacle than Stormlight Archive? And with this, I think that you could get even bigger casts. I think that you could get really big names here. You could bring in the actors that you've had in these other series that you've now established. And so when they're referenced here, we've already seen them in Warbreaker. We've already seen them in Elantris. We've already seen them in Mistborn. So the references will work for the audience. Because if you start out with Stormlight, the references won't all work properly. And also, what this will do is you will have a huge contrast. You have this huge show like Stormlight Archive, which I would do 10 to 12 episodes, make them about an hour and 15 minute long. Not crazy supersized, but don't make them short. Make them about an hour long. And when you do that, you have this big budget, epic fantasy, huge everything show. But you're also in the same universe. You have a little spy mystery thriller thing with the Wax and Wayne stories, and you have the romance with Warbreaker, or you have the smaller adventures with Dragonsteel. You have these different scope stories, so audiences, you will be able to keep people from churning the streaming service, but also audiences will just feel, man, what rich depth and potential stories we're able to get all at once. And Brandon will truly achieve that Walt Disney-like rank that he's always thought that he could get. And I think that if they play their cards right, they could do this perfectly. Now, I think it's likely that they will start with Mistborn and make it either a TV show or movie and make that the first Cosmere project. And maybe I just am misreading this. Maybe Mistborn will be such a huge hit that they don't need to worry about the budgets and they don't need to worry about anything else. I just think that the method that I laid out for this, I think that that's a safer method, and I think that that's one that will prove which fans are the true loyal fans in the long run. But I'm eager to see what they do. I'm eager to see what you think. If you like my idea, let me know down in the comments section. If you think I'm crazy and I need to change my ideas, let me know that as well. I'd love to have further discussion about this. But until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.